All right, thank you very much for those two presentations. Now, before we jump in, questions about homework? No, everyone's doing good. Just the fact that it's MNIST, that's it. Now, it's a visual data set, so different kinds of models should work better. So you should try to get the best model you can. And what you don't know yet, we're going to find out, is that your next week's homework is going to be doing MNIST as best as you possibly can. And our TA is going to generate some new data that doesn't exist in that set, but is of the same format. And whoever model does the best on all that data, that new little data set is going to get extra credit points. They will get 200 instead of 100. And everyone else just gets whatever score they get. So for some of you who may have, gotten lower scores in a couple of homeworks, this is one way to catch up. And the reason we're doing so many weeks of neural networks is because this is the meat and potatoes of what people do in machine learning right now. I should finish that in the next. Oh, you mean before this Thursday?
Yeah.
Not much feedback. If you contact me directly on Discord, I can give you some feedback there. But you may not get grades for last homework before maybe late Wednesday. But please feel free to contact me in Discord, and I will give you personal feedback. Anything else?
So for the next homework, would we turn in a model, let's say for the best R model?
Actually, just turn in the IPNYB file like usual and print your accuracy and everything again. Now for the following week, then you would be giving you would make your model such a way that Caleb could run it easily. You have to make a predict function that works like everybody else's. We'll talk about that.
Is the next one due this Thursday?
Yeah. Oh no, I think there might be Thanksgiving, is it?
Yeah.
We're gonna, there will be nothing due the week of Thanksgiving, and both classes are canceled the week of Thanksgiving. So what we're gonna all do is we're gonna pretend that whole week doesn't exist, and what would have been due that Thursday is due the following one. Yeah, all right. Sounds good. Okay. Now for this homework and following ones, you don't have to worry about the validation stuff if you don't want to. But I wanted to teach to you just so you understand it, and you're welcome to use it. And I suggest you keep using it the rest of your careers. But I want to go over again, what is it for? Because some of the questions that I've gotten make me think that I need to go over that again. But you don't have, I'm not forcing you to use it for your future homeworks. But it all comes from the idea that you might want to train in parallel. So if you have a bunch of different compute nodes all training the same neural network, and you have them, saving their models to some central repository. One way people solve this is they just keep saving them and they eventually choose the best of them all. But a better way, in my opinion, is that these don't operate independently forever. That there will be times, maybe even every epoch, where they go to the central repository and see what's the best we've done so far. Pull that model and then start using that. Sometimes you put some randomness in there so that maybe it doesn't choose the best model, it chooses the almost best model, or some Poisson distribution against the models that are sorted by goodness. Now, if you're going to choose a model based on some metric of goodness, you can just use the training loss or training accuracy. But this will have a bad effect in the end because you may overfit more and more to that training set. So you want some bulwark against overfitting. And the one way you get that is by having a way to measure how good your model is with respect to the wider world of data, not your training set. So maybe you use your test set, use your test loss or test accuracy as your way to determine how good each of the models in this giant directory are. But then you get the problem of now your test set is no longer a valid test because you've been selecting for models that do well in the test set. Then in the end, when you're done, you don't truly know how good your model is. You can't test it anymore. So we don't use this, we don't use this. We need some third sets, which is like a secondary test set. And we call that validation. Does that make sense? All right. Now let's get back into NLP. I want one of you to give me a one-sentence synopsis of why this topic is important. TFIDF. Why is this important?
You failed a job interview because you didn't.
Yes, that's why it's important to me personally. And hopefully that never happens to any of you. And you're not going to be able to say, my old teacher failed the job interview. That's why it's important. There's got to be a deeper reason. What is it? Come on, guys. What do you think?
I'm not sure. I was here last time, so.
Were you here?
But it gives not only the count of the words, but what's next to them, like their context.
That's how we vectorize the words. But that's not what this is about.
The supercalifragilistic bubble law is also not useful. It's too rare.
Perfect. That's it right there. So if you look just at term frequency, some term frequency spectrum, the most frequent will be things like the, a, and the least frequent will be, things like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious or syzygy, and all kinds of weird words that never appear. We want the sweet spot. We want the words in here. Now, this is just term frequency in your giant corpus. So if your corpus is all the works of Shakespeare, then you put all the works of Shakespeare on this spectrum with the least number of occurrences all the way up to the highest number of occurrences. Just out of curiosity, what kind of line would that draw? Would it be a straight line? What would it be?
The most common words here, I think it goes twice as much. Like the first most common word appears twice as much as the second most common, just twice as much. Third is a CPM distribution.
Yeah, it's curved like that. And some guy named Zip discovered it first, I guess. But it's a power law. That's another way to describe it. But still, the ones in the middle are the ones we want to focus on. And entropy is the deep mathematical reason why. We'll get to that in a second. But the intuitive reason is that if a document, let's say that if Shakespeare is all of our corpus, every chapter in a play could be a document, okay? If every document, all of them have N, A, and B in it, when we see these, how much are we learning? Nothing. But also, if we see syzygy or supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, which actually does not appear in Shakespeare, then we also haven't learned very much either, because it's a feature that applies to maybe one document. So term frequency is part of the picture. That is one of the spectrums that we care about. Now, let's talk about just, we call it document frequency, which means the number of documents in which a word appears. So first of all, you have to separate out all your documents. And however many documents there are in Shakespeare, if you have them for 3 chapters, maybe it's a few hundred. There will be some that are in all of the documents. And again, it's going to be things like a and the. And then there'll be some that are just in one document. There'll be probably, a whole bunch of these. And it's kind of the reverse curve of the other one, right? There'd be a whole bunch of things that are only a few or one, and then there'll just be a few things that are in all of them. But in both cases, you have this interesting relationship that can be summed up with the statement, common things are rare and rare things are common. How many of these super common words are there? There's only a few of them, right? Out of all the 50,000 words in English, very few of them are common. Common words are rare. Now, what about the rare words? How many rare words are there? Well, there's tons of rare words. Rare things are common, common things are rare. This comes up all the time, not just in NLP. Okay, so we want things that are in a certain number of documents at least. Like, let's say, here's 10 documents, things that are in at least 10 documents or more. So we use inverse. So 1/10. So it has to be, we could say the number has to be less than 1/10, but maybe we don't want it to be in all the documents. Maybe come up to here, like, 80% of the documents. So we have some other number that has to be higher than that. And this is the inverse document frequency we're looking for. So when you set up TF-IDF, you're actually looking at two things at once. How common the term is in the entire body of text, the corpus, and separately, how many documents it appears in. Because if you have a word that's frequent enough, it's right here in the middle, it's in your sweet spot, but every one of those occurrences is in just 2 documents, you don't want to use it.
So is your whole corpus of text is that including documents?
Let's say the whole corpus is the entire works of Shakespeare, and every document is a chapter.
Got it.
So if you want words that, if we choose this, they appear in at least 10 chapters anywhere in Shakespeare, and no more than some other number. And let's pretend that the top is, 500, and maybe this number is 300. So we want only words that appear in between 10 documents and 300 documents. If they appear in 301 documents, we ignore it. If it's less than 10 documents, we ignore it. And then on the term frequency in the entire thing, in words that are between here and here, in terms of the number of appearances. Now, let's look at just term frequency for a little bit and consider the math behind it. Let's say that the word the appears 10,000 times. I don't know how many times it actually appears in Shakespeare, but let's pretend it's 10,000. What we can do is we can also normalize this based on the number of all words. Let's say there's 100,000 words in all of Shakespeare. Then the has a prevalence of 10,000 over 100,000, or 0.1, okay? And that's the most common. Every other word is going to have something less common, right? We can also normalize it so that the is just the most, so it gets a 1. And we normalize everything else to be, 1.95 and on down to 0.0001 for the least common word. Now let's say we did that. Let's say we normalized everything between 0 and 1. Remember that entropy equation? Negative P log P. Negative P log P. That drives so much thinking behind things in computer science. Let's look at some of these values. Let's say we had one of these lower words that ends up with a score of 0.1, okay? Its entropy is going to be 0.32321, whatever. If we go up a little bit higher, so I'm gonna make this clearer. Okay, so 0.1, 0.33 something. Then a word that ends up with a term frequency score of 0.2 will get 0.464. Then for 0.3, we get 0.521. 0.4, 528. 0.5, we get 0.5 exactly. 0.6, we get 0.44. And 0.7, we get 0.36. So as you can start to see, it peaks, which may have been unexpected. But this is the mathematical thinking behind choosing that minimum range. So all the words like the, a, and, they're up here in this area. And all the really unfrequent words like syzygy are over here. We want the sweet spot in the middle. And this is a very good metric by which to choose those. Can anyone guess where the exact peak is? For that simple equation right there, negative P log of P. What P gives you the maximum value? What is that?
1 over E.
Yes. 1/e. And the entropy of 1/e is 0.530737. And some digits. All right, any questions on that? Okay, back to this. We have vectors that represent each word. That's one way we can deal with these words. Now, as we saw before, you have zeugmas, if you remember that word, a zeugma, like does Air France serve Philadelphia and breakfast? We know those are two different words. They are expressed with the same letters, but they're really two different words. So in a real system, what you want is you want these to be meanings of these words, not just the word. Maybe you have dog as a verb somewhere else, or other meanings of dog, like I'm dog tired. That's somewhere else. This is dog the animal. And it's gonna be relatively close to cat, but not as close as ocelot is. We also talked in the past about distance metrics, the very beginning of this course. And there's a lot of work that's gone into studying the distance metrics that work between word vectors. The cosine distance is the most commonly used one, and it works the best. However, you can do combinations that work even better. And there have been some guys who've done neural networks that take in two things, the Euclidean distance and the cosine distance. And depending on the situation, they will give you out another distance metric that's a combination of those two. And that will work even better. And in a perfect world, what you would have is you would have a setup where you use exclusively the cosine distance most of the time. But then you get words like big and huge and humongous, which in a perfect world will actually all be on the same angle. And so they'll have zero distance between each other, but some of them will be further out, more extreme. And you would want large and big and huge, humongous, to all be on the same angle, but have different distances from the origin. So in that case, the cosine distance doesn't do anything for you. You need the Euclidean one. So that neural network that combines both can learn things like that. But that requires that your vectors are distributed in a certain way, which may or may not happen. But let's talk about how we make these vectors. We will get to that. First of all, let's talk about the words that appear with other words. We can have some kind of idea of the probability that dogs appears, right? We can have all the words in the English language, maybe 50,000, and we'll look at how often they appear in giant corpora. And then we can use that to determine some a priori probability that the next word we see will be DOGS. Would that change if the three words that came before it were these? Yes, it would change it a lot. In fact, this is one way you can also look for idioms. Because you would see raining cats and dogs, and you will almost never see raining cats and other animals. It's not a piece of syntax or grammar that is very flexible and people throw in all kinds of things in there. They don't. It's almost always raining cats and dogs. That's one way you can look for an idiom. But it brings up this idea of n-grams. 1 gram, 2 grams, 3 grams, 4 grams. A unigram is like hello. A bigram is 2 words, and etc. Early in like 2009 or so, Google was publishing a giant pentagram list or 5 gram list of all the words on the internet in the 5 grams that were the most common. And you could use this for free for research purposes. And a lot of the research at the time seemed to show that going above 5 grams didn't help. And 5 grams sometimes were questionable. And 4 grams are enough for most things, at least at the time. So a language model is something that either explicitly or implicitly knows the corresponding probabilities or joint probabilities of words in bigrams, trigrams, 4 grams, whatever. So given a word, what is the probability of all other words in English based on having that one word? And then do it again based on having the 2 words. And of course, some models learn it in both directions at once, going from the beginning to the end or from the end to the beginning. Okay, now I'm just going to throw some other concepts at you that all are included in this topic. Lemmatization is an important concept because the number of features can explode. If you have a language which has lots of morphology, which means a word can have many different forms, then you don't want to have to treat every one of those as its own word. So every one of these words, go, going, went, we want to think about them as one word that, has different forms. But the feature would only have that one field, was go, or dilemma being go in this sentence or in this document. And runs, running, ran, all goes to run. Run is the core word behind it. And you have some other feature maybe that stores what forms they were in. Now, when you're looking at 4 grams, or let's say trigrams in this case, we think of it as a window. And we're going to slide this window across the text. Maybe you start at the very beginning of the first play of Shakespeare, and you make it all the way to the end by just sliding a window. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to try to get information or a way to represent the 3rd word in this window based on the other 2. So as we start here, we have information on the word not. Thou and shalt preceded it. And then on the word make, shalt and not preceded that. And then we keep going. So you can think of this as the friends of a word tell you about that word. You know a word by the company it keeps. So now let's look through a larger body of text. And let's say that these are all the occurrences in maybe a slightly larger document. We want to be able, actually, let's say there is a word out there, some other word that appeared with the word mind 8 times in its window. It appeared with the word human 23 times in its window. And 88, 87. This vector is actually usually much, much larger. If we were trying to take all of the words in this region with Shakespeare, we might end up with 2,000 words, or we could whittle it down till it's let's say it's the 1,000 words that have this highest entropy score, okay? We've used term frequency, but then we also use document frequency, which would be a totally separate graph with the same idea. So we get those 1,000 most important or information carrying words. That is our vector, and that would be these. So instead of this is like 15 or whatever, imagine this is 1,000 words. And we slid that window across all of Shakespeare. And then for some word, let's say that word is saucy. Saucy, let's say it appeared with mind 8 times, and human 23 times, and thou 22 times, and shalt 45 times. This becomes a vector with which we can describe saucy. And it doesn't matter if saucy is in this region or not. We can even take a really rare word like syzygy. It's not important enough to be in our region that we care about. But if it appears out there, it will have some of these values be non-zero. Hopefully. So this is a way to embed any word in Shakespeare. And you're embedding it in a 1,000-dimensional space. So I'm going to start over. This is an important topic to get. First of all, we take all the words of Shakespeare and count how many times they appear. We make this graph. We choose the ones with the highest entropy. We choose 1,000 of them. Then we do the same thing with document frequency to make sure we have things that are in enough documents, but not too many documents, okay? These 1,000 words are chosen based on those two things. Then we make a chart like this. This chart has 1,000 words. Then we go back through Shakespeare again with that sliding window. We start at the very beginning, and now we're doing it for every word, not just the 1,000 words. So we do it for not, make, a, machine, in. So like a is a very common word. It wouldn't make our 1,000 list, but we can still vectorize it. We can still count the number of times things appear in the window. And we will get a vector like this for a, and, the, thou, shalt, syzygy, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Everything will get a vector like this. Now, these kinds of vectors aren't great to deal with in neural networks because, you got these big numbers. It's not really normalized. It's nicer to deal with something that maybe goes from -1 to 1. Yes?
So are we only making big vectors for 1,000 words?
No.
Or are we making the vector for each word?
You make 1,000 vector for every word.
So the vectors only contain the 1,000 words, but we're making a vector for every word.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So you choose 1,000 words, and that is your basis. That is the space in which you're going to plot points. Like this point in space has a coordinate of 8 in this dimension, coordinate of 23 in this dimension. And you can, just write out those coordinates like number, comma, number, comma, number, 1,000 length. But you're doing it for every word. What is in the window with that word? In the end, you end up with something like this for every word. If there were 10,000 words, let's say, that individually appear at least once in all of Shakespeare, then you end up with 10,000 of those. But again, this is not easy to deal with. What also makes it not easy to deal with is that it's 10,000 long. So a lot of times in machine learning, we like to do dimensionality reduction. We like to map this onto a smaller vector. There's a lot of ways we can do this. You can use neural networks, you can use PCA, you can use UMAP. We've talked about some of these in past classes. But what we would tend to do is we would come up with a smaller vector that represents this same information. And you do this with all the vectors in mind at once. And you want to have smaller vectors, maybe in each dimension. This having only 6 dimensions. In each dimension, maybe it has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. That would be a really nice setup. That would mean your data is clustered kind of around the unit hypersphere. That's why I use this visualization. Think about a unit hypersphere. And most of your points are, inside or around or near that hypersphere. And maybe you started off with 1,000 dimensions, but now you're down to 300. So it's a 300-dimensional sphere. All right. So once you have all those vectors and you have them in this space, then you want to look at the distances between them. And obviously the distance between any word and itself is going to be 0. You would want, by the way, there's an error here, I'm sorry. The below and above the ears should be the same. So in this ocelot and tiger have a distance of 0. I don't know if that's good. Ocelot and dog should be higher than ocelot and cat. Tiger and cat should be closer than tiger and dog. That's the kind of thing you want to look for. Sorry for the mistakes in that. Okay, this is actual data that came out of Google Word2Vec. Some of the earliest work on this, the guy named Nikolaev did at Google, I think. Yeah. He came up with vectors for all these words, and it was about 350 in length, I think, 350 dimensions. And that was not the original counts. That was after doing dimensionality reduction. So he did the sliding windows, but not on Shakespeare, instead on a massive amount of the internet at the time. This is maybe 2014 or something. And he came up with these 300-dimensional vectors, but then was able to make projections down to 2 dimensions for certain cases that he put in the paper. And this one was interesting. What we find is that in certain down conversions, down to 2 dimensions, you will see that axes have meaning. What is the meaning of the x-axis here?
Hierarchy.
Nope.
On the X,
X.
and the Y.
What's the x-axis?
Gender.
Yep. And the y-axis is kind of like hierarchy or royalty. And what they found is that if they took, so this is, every one of these is just a vector. It has coordinates behind it. And in the high dimensions, they actually took the vector for king, they subtract the vector for man, they added the vector for woman, and that got them to the vector for queen. That makes sense, right? King minus man plus woman equals queen. At least that's what the data was saying. That just comes out of how these words appear in text. And of course, it's decades of text. A lot of it is books. And this was what they put in the paper. And you can see this kind of thing came up in other situations too. And there were some things that may run afoul of AI ethics. What are the ethical considerations here? Yeah, that's why do you think the data came out like this?
I think typically when a woman is working in medicine, it's nurse, so it's probably just numbers.
Yes, years of the patriarchy. This brings up, one of the great dangers in AI is you have to train it on lots and lots of data. Sometimes neural networks don't show prompts until they've looked at 1 million data points. If you're going to get 1 million data points from the past, you're going to bring the past along with us. So if there's anything in the past that we want to move on from and change, We need to be very careful about not letting that into our data sets. AI ethics is a very big deal in all parts of your life right now. It is deciding which resumes get looked at. It's deciding who gets promoted. They even use it sometimes to decide who gets paroled. And it's not great. And you guys are going to be facing this again and again in your career. All right. We've already looked at this, right? Yeah. I'm good on past some of that. Okay. Okay, let's look at a little bit of natural language understanding. The speech was audible from the National Mall. The toy was available at the Burlington Mall. So if you were to write rules to understand what this means, you might be tempted to put the actual words into your rules and say things like, okay, National Mall must be, location. That's where the Washington Monument is. But then if you get to the Burlington Mall, it's a totally different kind of mall. Bill was sent to Capitol Hill. Yes, it is an actual hill, but it's not a hill in the same way that Jack and Jill went up to get a patch of, pail of water. Rule systems end up breaking. Like the speech came from, well, it's no longer really a place, it's a person. Toilet is available at the next holiday. Well, and that's time instead of a location. The bill was sent to the Ways and Means Committee instead of Capitol Hill. So any rules-based system you can think of is going to break. So part of the history of NLP is seeking flexible technologies, flexible ways to understand all of that. And I think we are out of time. So I'll leave you with one last thing. Metonymy. That's a fun word. Metonymy. And it's examples like, if you're a waiter at a restaurant, hey, table 5 wants water. You know what he means. Tables don't drink water though. That's one of the hardest things to handle in natural language understanding. Thank you, everybody, and I'll see you next time.